There is a grain that fed 3,000 years of desert civilizations, a crop that produces a full harvest on 8 inches of rain per year, while modern wheat demands 30. The $50 billion global wheat industry has one simple reason it does not want you growing this instead. It cannot patent the rain. This is the story of sorghum bicolor. And what was buried alongside it was not just a crop, it was a blueprint for surviving a world running out of water. Go back to 2000 BC. The Sahel, that thin green strip of land pressed between the Sahara Desert and the wetter forests of Central Africa. The sun does not negotiate in the Sahel. Temperatures push past 110 degrees Fahrenheit for months at a time. The soil is shallow, iron poor, relentless. And yet, for millennia, millions of people did not merely survive here. They built cultures, trade routes, and agricultural systems that outlasted empires. The crop at the center of that survival was sorghum. Farmers there did not use irrigation. They did not use chemical fertilizers. They planted sorghum in the cracked red earth and walked away. The plant did the rest. Sorghum has a biological architecture that most modern agronomists still treat as secondary research. It should be front-page news. The plant's root system exudes a waxy suberin coating that physically seals moisture inside the root zone, reducing water loss at the soil interface by up to 60% compared to wheat. Its leaf surface carries a cuticle layer dense enough to reflect excess solar radiation. The plant essentially manages its own temperature. When drought conditions become extreme, sorghum enters a state researchers call drought dormancy. It halts growth entirely, locks its moisture reserves, and waits. Then, when rain returns, even after weeks of apparent death, it resumes growth as though nothing happened. No pharmaceutical can replicate that. No irrigation system teaches that. It is engineered into the seed by 4,000 years of evolution under pressure. In 1944, the Rockefeller Foundation launched what historians now call the Green Revolution. The goal was noble on its surface: end global hunger by maximizing crop yields. The method was specific: identify the highest yielding varieties of wheat, rice, and maize. Breed them for industrial uniformity. Distribute them to the developing world alongside the chemical inputs, synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, needed to sustain them. Sorghum was not on the priority list. Norman Borlaug, the architect of the Green Revolution and a Nobel laureate, focused his work almost exclusively on dwarf wheat varieties. Those varieties yielded more grain per acre, but only under ideal conditions. Abundant water, abundant chemical inputs, controlled irrigation. The entire system was optimized for wet, resource-rich environments. What the Rockefeller Foundation did not advertise was what got left behind. Dozens of drought-tolerant traditional crops, sorghum, teff, fonio, amaranth, were classified as subsistence crops, not commercially scalable, not worth the investment. The academic infrastructure, the research funding, the international development dollars, all of it flooded toward wheat, rice, and maize. Sorghum got pennies. The pattern repeats. Amaranth was banned by conquistadors for being too sacred and too sovereign. Fonio was ignored because its small seeds resist mechanized harvesting. Teff thrived only after a famine forced Western attention onto Ethiopia. In every case, the crop that enabled independence was the crop that received no investment, not because it failed, because it succeeded without requiring the inputs that generate profit. Here is where the story fractures into numbers. In 2019, researchers at the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, ICRISAT, completed a comparative yield study across drought-stressed conditions in sub-Saharan Africa. Under water-limited conditions, sorghum yields averaged 2.1 metric tons per hectare with zero irrigation. Wheat yields under the same conditions collapsed to 0.4 metric tons per hectare. That is not a marginal difference. That is a 5-to-1 survival advantage. In 2021, the journal Frontiers in Plant Science published research from Purdue University examining sorghum's water use efficiency ratio, the amount of grain produced per unit of water consumed. Sorghum produced 1 gram of dry matter per 250 to 300 milliliters of water. Wheat required 450 to 600 milliliters for the same output. In a world where agriculture already consumes 70% of all freshwater withdrawals globally, that gap is not a footnote. It is a civilizational decision. And yet, as of 2023, global wheat cultivation covers approximately 220 million hectares. Sorghum covers 42 million. The drought-resistant crop holds 16% of the footprint of the water-hungry one. The suppression of sorghum in American agriculture has a specific address: the 1970 Plant Variety Protection Act. Before that act, plant breeding was largely public work. Land-grant universities developed crop varieties and released them into the commons. Farmers saved seed. Knowledge moved freely. The 1970 Act created intellectual property protections for new plant varieties, the first legal mechanism allowing private corporations to own seeds. By 1980, following the Supreme Court's decision in Diamond versus Chakrabarty, which ruled that living organisms could be patented, the commercial seed industry consolidated with remarkable speed. Monsanto, Pioneer, DeKalb began acquiring smaller seed companies throughout the 1980s and 1990s. By 2008, Monsanto alone controlled roughly 23% of the global commercial seed market. The crops they invested in were the crops that required their herbicides, their fertilizers, their patented genetic modifications. Sorghum, which requires none of these inputs at scale, received almost no private investment. USDA research funding for sorghum, improvement between 1980 and 2000, totaled approximately $180 million. Wheat received over $1.4 billion in the same period. Not because wheat was more important to a water-scarce future, because wheat was more important to a chemical-dependent business model. Sorghum is not a relic. It grows right now in Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, the American drought belt. It grows in South Asia, across the Sahel, in the dry highlands of Mexico. It looks like corn at first glance, broad leaves, thick stalk, but the seed head sits at the top like a dense reddish-bronze torch, heavy with grain. The seeds are small, round, almost translucent at harvest. The stalk, when split, releases a faint sweetness. Some varieties are fermented into opaque beer across southern Africa, thick, slightly sour, consumed the same way it was consumed 3,000 years ago. In Ethiopia and Eritrea, injera, the spongy fermented flatbread at the center of nearly every meal, was originally made with sorghum and teff before commercial. Wheat flour became the cheaper industrial option. In Nigeria, tuwo, a dense porridge, is still made with sorghum in homes that have not surrendered to imported grain. These are not primitive holdovers. These are functional food systems that survived every drought their regions produced. The crop did not lose on nutritional merit. Per 100 grams, sorghum delivers 11 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, and a glycemic index roughly 30% lower than refined wheat. It is naturally gluten-free. In 2018, a clinical study published in Nutrients, 56 participants, 8 weeks, found that whole sorghum consumption reduced LDL cholesterol by 14% compared to a wheat-based control diet. It outperforms wheat nutritionally. It outperforms wheat hydrologically. It costs less to grow and requires no patented inputs. The question is not why sorghum disappeared from the dominant food system. The question is who benefited from that disappearance. The aquifers beneath the American Great Plains are disappearing. The Ogallala Aquifer, the underground reservoir that irrigates approximately 30% of all U.S. groundwater-fed irrigation, has lost an estimated 9% of its total volume since large-scale pumping began. In some Kansas counties, the water table has dropped more than 150 feet since 1950. Scientists at Kansas State University published projections in 2023 suggesting that without intervention, portions of the southern Ogallala will be functionally depleted within 25 years. The crop that does not need that water is already growing in Kansas. It has been growing there, forgotten, for decades. The seed that survived 4,000 years of Saharan drought is still here, still viable, still capable of feeding people on rainfall alone, in soils that wheat would abandon. It just waits for a food system willing to remember. If this vault opened something for you, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell. Every like and every share preserves what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.